In the early hours of the morning, local time, the first series of anti-aircraft fire appeared over Tehran. Moments later, residents of the capital began posting videos of explosions in various parts of the Iranian city. We can see columns of smoke rising after a series of explosions. Shortly after they were heard, the Israeli defense minister officially announced this. Israel quickly confirmed the launch of an operation targeting Iranian military infrastructure. The strikes initially focused on radars and air defense systems, which was intended to open up space for subsequent waves of attacks. Together with the United States, we will strike decisively against the terrorist regime. We will create conditions that will allow the brave Iranian people to free themselves from the burden of this criminal system. Explosions were reported not only in Tehran, but also in Isfahan and Tabriz, near facilities linked to Iran's military industry and missile program. This is an operation targeting a specific threat against us. In recent months, we have identified that the regime continues to develop offensive plans against the state of Israel, focusing on rebuilding and accelerating the production of ballistic missiles, developing, strengthening, and concealing its nuclear program, and continuing to pursue its plan to destroy Israel. A few hours later, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke, announcing the start of combat operations against Iran. In practice, this meant the U.S. joining the operation led by Israel.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. It's meant to...
American aircraft and naval units, which had been strengthening their presence in the region for weeks, began protective operations. Aircraft took off from both land bases and aircraft carriers operating in the region. Footage from Iraq showed a series of Tomahawk cruise missiles flying towards Iran. It did not take long for Tehran to respond. The scale of its response clearly shows that the regime has decided on a full-scale response, having essentially nothing left to lose. Trump should know that today we have the most advanced capabilities that allow us to fight you for many years. At the beginning of this war, we are using what is at the lowest level of our stockpiles. But as it continues, we will resort to our most powerful missiles. Weapons that we have not yet revealed and have kept secret will also be used in the coming days. Alarm sirens sounded in several Israeli cities, and missile defense systems began intercepting incoming missiles. Targets were definitely hit in Haifa. Over Tel Aviv, most of the missiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome. Some of the missiles were also directed at U.S. military installations in the region. Information about defensive actions was confirmed, among others, in Bahrain, where the U.S. Fifth Fleet is stationed. Missile activity was also reported over Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Other countries decided to close their airspace for fear of further escalation. It is known that there are civilian casualties who, as here in Qatar, were hit by falling fragments of a downed Iranian missile. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who turned the country into a powerful anti-U.S. force and extended its military influence across the Middle East while crushing repeated domestic unrest, was killed in the joint strikes of Israel and the United States, as confirmed by a senior Israeli official who passed on the information to Reuters. Formations linked to Iran in Iraq and Syria have been placed on high alert. Hezbollah activity has increased along the border with Israel, and Tehran-backed Houthi rebels have announced a return to attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. American strike groups with aircraft carriers and an extensive missile defense system show that preparations are being made for a much broader conflict. According to sources in Washington, the campaign is expected to last at least several days. It will consist of waves of strikes and ongoing assessment of the effects. As Donald Trump has admitted, the main goal today is to overthrow the Ayatollah regime.
overwhelming
Alongside reports of the strikes, videos began appearing on Iranian social media, showing residents of some cities taking to the streets and reacting with relief, and in some places even joy, to the news of the attacks against the regime. For months, Iran has remained a deeply divided country, where successive waves of protests have been brutally suppressed by the security apparatus. For part of the population, today's events are seen not as a foreign attack, but as a possible beginning of the weakening of the system of government. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah of Iran, who is currently in exile, addressed the Iranian people, calling on the state apparatus and security forces to turn away from the authorities in Tehran and support political change. It is difficult to assess at this stage whether isolated public reactions will develop into a broader movement. However, it is the situation inside Iran, rather than the airstrikes themselves, that may ultimately determine the fate of the regime.
اکنون که جمهوری اسلامی در حال فروپاشی است
As the Islamic Republic begins to crumble, my message to the military, police, and security services is clear. You swore to protect Iran and the Iranian people, not the Islamic Republic and its leaders. Stand with the people and help bring about a stable and secure transition. The history of recent wars shows that air superiority allows you to destroy targets, but rarely allows you to change power systems. Regimes fall, not when bombs fall, but when they lose control of their own country. Therefore, today's strikes may only be the beginning of a long-term process that no one can fully control anymore. Because if Iran survives militarily, the conflict will spread, and if the regime begins to falter, the consequences may be even less predictable than the war itself. The attack on Iran is the second major military operation by the United States this year. It was preceded by weeks of planning and a rapid deployment of troops to the Middle East, quick and effective. Let's see what happens. The United States is the world's greatest superpower. It is capable of carrying out an operation that could even lead to regime change in Iran. Where are the Germans? Where are the French? This is a very legitimate question, because it is France and especially Germany that claim leadership in the European Union, at the expense of weakening the role of the United States in the region. In an interview with the American agency Bloomberg, the head of the National Security Bureau, Sławomir Cęckiewicz, warns that this is one of the greatest threats to the EU's safe armament credit. The program aims to increase Europe's defense capabilities, but in reality it is a way to gradually turn away from the US. The point is that the vast majority of the €150 billion pool, the value of the SAFE program, is to go to companies operating in the European Union. This excludes purchases from American manufacturers, which according to the US ambassadors to NATO and the European Union, consequently weakens the transatlantic alliance. EU decision-makers face a clear choice: to pursue a policy that restricts market access and fragments the defense sector, or one that supports an environment of openness, competition, and innovation. The latter approach supports common security, readiness, resilience, and lucrative investments, benefiting taxpayers, workers, and soldiers on both sides of the Atlantic. For several decades, the Americans have been a guarantor of security, not only for Poland, but also for the whole of Europe. They sent 10,000 of their soldiers to Poland, and since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, they have been quickly and effectively supplying us with top-of-the-line weapons: Abrams tanks, HIMARS, Patriots, and F-35 fighter jets are just some of what Polish soldiers already have at their disposal. But instead of continuing this cooperation, the government is pushing for an EU loan for EU weapons. We have been and will continue to be a loyal ally of America, but we cannot be suckers. This approach is in line with Germany's agenda of pushing the United States out of Europe. It is true that we have issues with Germany, as we do with many other countries, but we have more interests in common. However, history teaches us that common interests more often connect Germany with Russia, usually at the expense of Poland. There is no trace in the current government's policy of any action or even reflection that could not only prevent but even anticipate the threat posed by the anti-Polish joint action of Germany and Russia, which has affected practically every generation of Poles. This is not the only threat posed by SAFE that the government refuses to acknowledge. The conditionality mechanism, known from the National Recovery Plan, raises enormous doubts. The government reassures us that this time the payment of subsequent tranches will not depend on who is in power in Poland.
Jedynym powodem, dla którego mówimy o...
The only reason we are talking about the conditions for using funds, grants or loans prepared by the European Union, and this also applies to the SAFE project, is to protect these projects from the threat of corruption or careless spending that is not in line with the purpose of these funds. However, someone will have to assess whether corruption has occurred or not. This is the task of the judiciary, and in the case of the National Recovery Plan, it was precisely the alleged threat to the rule of law that served as a pretext for suspending the payments due to Poland. The opposition warns against repeating the same mechanism in the case of SAFE. And of course the issue of the rule of law arises here, but for obvious reasons. Only in a country where we have an independent judiciary, an efficient prosecutor's office, clear laws and anti-corruption safeguards, only in such a country can we be sure that this very large amount of money will not be wasted. Questions about the financial costs of the loan also remain unanswered. It is not yet known whether the interest rate is 3% or 4%, why we have to pay interest first and only after a few years the capital, or why we are borrowing in euros, even though we operate in Polish zloty on a daily basis. The currency risk alone could drive SAFE loan installments to horrendous amounts in the future. This may turn out to be a trap with no way out, because the supposed European power is like the European arms industry and the European army. It exists only in theory. It has practically no aircraft carriers, except perhaps the French have one. It does not have such military potential, such a capacity to deploy troops within a dozen or so days. And today, we say that it is the European Union, and even Germany, that would be the guarantor of our security. So in the context of the SAFE program, it is very important for us to realize that this program has nothing to do with guaranteeing Poland's security. When Poland inquired about the possibility of purchasing the latest generation of Leopard tanks in March 2022, Germany offered to sell 20 outdated models. The Americans agreed to supply 250 Abrams tanks over 4 years. They have the strength and resources, which, as we can see now in Iran, they do not hesitate to use. The United States builds its strength on international alliances, and those who oppose these alliances are destroyed very effectively. Poland is an ally of the United States. Militarily, politically, we have a joint army. We have full interoperability, and it is better that it stays that way. After the SAFE Act was passed by the Sejm Senate, the final decision on this matter now rests with the president. The matter is obviously so important to the Polish state and evokes so much emotion in Poland that I will not say today what decision I will make. I still have a few weeks to make that decision. I am, of course, still looking into the matter and searching for solutions. Polish President Karol Nawrocki has 20 days left to decide whether to sign or veto the SAFE Act. Thousands of Iranian expatriates in Germany and the United Kingdom are celebrating the attacks on Iran. They thank the United States and Israel for giving them hope that they will soon return to a free democratic homeland. Thank you, USA, and thank you, Bibi, and freedom for Iran are the slogans of demonstrations in Berlin and London. I'm happy. Nobody wants war, but there is no other way for the Iranian people to ever experience freedom. This can only be achieved through outside intervention, and I'm happy that people will simply gain basic freedom, just like all of us. According to the police, up to 3,000 participants gathered at Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. Numerous Israeli and U.S. flags are waving above the demonstrators. However, the historical green, white, and red flags depicting a lion and a sun, the colors used during the Pahlavi dynasty, dominate. It's amazing. People are infinitely happy. It's not true that our country has been attacked. It's our regime that has been attacked. People are happy that one day they will be free. There is no shortage of images of Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of the former Shah of Iran. On banners and flags, the 65-year-old is praised as a savior and the future king of Iran. I hope this will all be over soon, and we will be dancing in Iran. Join us and celebrate with us. A similar rally in support of an attack on the Iranian regime took place in London, waving the historic Iranian flag from before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. People chanted slogans in honor of Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of the last Shah of Iran. The American-Israeli attack on key centers of power in Iran gives hope for the overthrow of the Ayatollah regime and Iran's return to the family of peaceful, democratic countries.